Let's do a quick review because tomorrow we have a test. We're closing the unit tomorrow. So let's take a look. Because we're closing the unit, it includes everything since the beginning of the unit, not just this week, the whole unit. So let's take a look. Write the number represented below. A football player had a loss of 3 yards. Okay, so loss means they lost, they went backwards. So the number that is represented here will be -3. Just a +3 will not be correct, right? -3. Let's take a look at number 32. The opposite of -23. Every time I use the word opposite, I'm going to change the sign of the number that comes after. So instead of calling it -23, I'm going to call this +23. Right. From negative, I made it into positive. If it was positive to begin with, I would have changed it to negative, right? Change the sign of the number after. Another thing that we learned was how to list the numbers from least to greatest. So write the numbers in order from least to greatest. Negatives are smaller than positives, so let me identify my negatives. In this case, I have a lot of them. Normally, right, if all my numbers were positive, the biggest number, like I said, if my numbers were positive, the biggest number here will be 112 if they were positive. Now, because they're negative, it's the other way around. 112 is the smallest. So let me write this as a -112. That's the smallest. As a matter of fact, let me cancel them out. For the numbers that I have left, if they were positive, 56 will be the biggest. But because it is negative, it goes the other way around. So -56. Let me cancel it out. Again, let me take a look at my negatives. If they were positive, 31 will be the biggest. But because they're negative, I'm going to say -31 comes after. Then -28, then -18. So I did all my negatives and then 0. Negatives are always to the left of 0. Positives are always to the right of 0. All right, let's take a look at number 24. Let me identify my negatives. There we go. Negatives are smaller than positives. If there were positives, I know 21 will be the biggest. But because they're negatives, it's the other way around. -21 is the smallest. Then we have a -17 and then -3. Let me cancel them out. I already used my negatives. So negatives is the opposite of the positives. Then 0, I do have a 0. So let me put a 0 here. Now to the right of my 0, I have the positives. 12 and 23. 12 is smaller than 23. So we're going to write 12 and then 23. The negatives are on the left, the positives are on the right. A good example of the numbers listed in order from least to greatest is the number line. You guys have seen it. That's basically it. The numbers listed from left to right or from least to greatest. Okay, now we're going to complete it with an inequality sign. The first one we read this as greater than, and the second one we read it as less than. It looks like a mouth, and obviously the third one we read that as equal. When the numbers are not equal, right, when one number is bigger than the other, that looks like a mouth, we're going to open the mouth towards the big number. Now, if the numbers are equal, then use the equal sign. So here, I have a -12 and a +12. I know they look like 12, so it makes me want to say equal. However, one of them is negative, the other one is positive, so they're not equal. Positives are bigger than negatives, so the inequality sign I'm going to use is that. We read that as less than. -12 is less than 12. Looking at question number 36. Okay, so they're both negatives. If they were positives, 23 will be the biggest. But because they're negatives, it's the other way around. So -13 is the biggest from those two. Now, because the first number is bigger, we read that as -13 is greater than -23. Another thing we learn is what is the distance the following number is away from 0. Another way we can write distance, right? -5. I can write it with these lines on the outside. We call that absolute value. So that's one way I can see this, or I can see as a number line. There's 0. I want to write -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. There's two ways how we can answer this question. One of them is literally count the distance from 0. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's one way. Another way, it was seeing it as an absolute value. Now the absolute value says make the number positive. If it was positive to begin with, keep it positive. If it was negative to begin with, change it to positive. My answer will be a positive answer. So just 5. Looking at number 38, I can see this as the absolute value of 12, or I can use the number line and count spaces. I'm not going to count. Instead, I'm going to use the absolute value. Absolute value says make the number positive. It is positive already, so leave it as positive 12. Now, when we're solving, we saw this at the end of the unit. When we're solving, it says absolute value of x is equal to 4. Now, when we don't know the value of something, we're going to replace it with the letter. Next year in algebra, mainly we're going to replace it using x and y. But in reality in math, when we use a letter, means we don't know the value of something. So we don't know the value of x, but I know the absolute value of x is equal to 4. That means x was -4 to begin with, or positive 4. Absolute value means make it into positive, but I have to consider it was negative to begin with or it was positive to begin with. I have to consider both cases. So -4, positive 4. There's two answers. Make sure you guys list them in order from small to large. Negatives are smaller than positives. Now here in the last one, we're solving the absolute value of v is equal to 3. So that means that v was equal to -3 to begin with or positive 3. Because remember, absolute value means make it positive. But I have to consider it was negative to begin with or it was positive to begin with. I have to think of both cases.